Welcome back. All right, so I talked about the East yesterday. I want to talk about the West today. The picture in the West is very different from the picture in the East. Um, some mediocre numbers. I've got four teams with up arrows here because didn't expect them to be this good this far into the season, and four teams with down arrows who have underperformed to this point in the season. And we'll get into looking at each of these teams. And again, I'm presenting this a little different than the East because it's a different situation, and what's the point of doing two videos that are exactly the same back-to-back days? So the Dallas Stars lead the Central. So the Central, then the Pacific, wild cards, and then teams outside the playoffs. Dallas, 12 games, 8-3-1 record, 708 points percentage. I didn't expect that. I didn't think that Dallas would necessarily hit the ground running as they have, and it's been great to watch. Plus 19 in the goal differential category, so they're really dominant. They're scoring 3.83 goals per game. They're only allowing 2.25. Despite the injury to Ottinger, hasn't sidetracked them at all. They haven't slowed down. Their power play, 29.3%, has been fantastic. 84.6% on the penalty kill. But against the East, and I've got the Eastern records for each of these teams on the board, they're 2-3-1. And I wanted to do that because the argument comes up a lot of whether the East is better than the West and yada yada. And I think there's an argument to be made that yes, the East is better than the West. So, but it doesn't necessarily show just with the Dallas side of things. However, if you take out that 2-3-1, Dallas is 6-0 against the West. Winnipeg, 11 games, 7-3-1 record. Their points percentage, 682. They've got a goal differential of +6. They're scoring an even 3 goals per game. They're allowing 2.45 goals against per game. Their power play, pretty good, 20.5%. Their penalty kill, 82.8%. So those two numbers add up to more than 100. That's good. Against the East, they're 2-1. So being above 500 against the East definitely seems to help. The East, you play 16 teams in the East twice, so it's 32 games of the season. It's not as insignificant as one might think when you're looking at what might get a team into the playoffs or cost a team the playoffs. So for Colorado, they come back now to North America after a successful trip overseas. Now their record's 6-4-1. They've got a 591 points percentage. Their goal differential's a +9. And again, in part because of those wins over Columbus, they're scoring 3.55 goals per game. They're allowing 2.82 goals per game. Their power play, 38.2%. Their penalty kill, 70.7%. They're 3-2 against the East. Again, the back-to-back wins over Columbus helped them there. We'll see if they can stay above 500 against the East. But it feels like Colorado, after a slow start, are getting things rolling. Then you get to Vegas, who are leading the entire West overall. They're 11-2 in 13 games, 846 points percentage, which is ridiculous. Plus 19 in the goal differential category, so they are tied with Dallas for the best in the West there. 3.54 goals scored per game, 2.08 goals against. So apparently the goaltending's just fine. Their power play, 23.8%. Their penalty kill, low, 76.7%. That's something they're going to want to fix. But they're 4-0 against the East. So playing against the East, they kind of have an easier time than the West. They have Toronto tonight. We'll see if they stay perfect against the East tonight. And right behind them is Seattle. Yeah. Nobody expected Seattle to be here. 7-4-2 is their record through 13 games, 615 points percentage, a +5 in terms of goal differential, scoring 3.46 goals per game and allowing 3.08 goals against per game. They are still allowing more goals than they would want to. They're allowing the most goals of any team I've talked about so far, but they're scoring enough to overcome it. 26.1% on the power play, and their penalty kill, 73.8%. So the penalty kill does need to improve, but it feels like over the last couple of weeks, their defensive numbers have improved. I expect the power play to come up too if that or penalty kill to come up if that continues to be the case. And against the East, thanks in part to the back-to-back wins over Pittsburgh when given the opportunity, they are 3-1 against the East. So we'll see how the season goes for them. But so far, so good. They have 16 points in 13 games. They only had 60 all of last season. They only need 45 points from here to get more points than they had last year, but I don't think that's the goal. I think, for Ron Francis, looking at this is a team that with an addition or two could be a bona fide playoff contender, and they do have enough cap space and players they can move around here and there. They could make it work. So keep an eye on Seattle. The LA Kings, 14 games, 7-6-1 record, the most unpredictable team. They're up there. 536 points percentage, -4 goal differential. They seem to be exchanging games where they're dominant with games that they're not very good. They're scoring 3.43 goals per game. They're allowing 3.79. So the save percentage right near the bottom of the league. Last I saw, I know they were at 32nd. I think they're 31st now with goals or with save percentage as a team, but it's been a problem. Their power play, not fantastic at 19.7%. Their penalty kill, 76.8%. So they're going to want to improve both of those. However, they're 4-2 against the East. So because they win 4 out of 6 against the East, they're above the playoff line. Then you get into your wild cards. You've got the Edmonton Oilers. Weren't supposed to be this mediocre. 7-6 so far in the season, 538 points percentage. They're a +3 in the goal differential category. 3.85 goals scored per game, which is the highest number of anybody. Dallas is close, but Edmonton's ahead of them. But the 3.62 goals against is a problem. And we've seen with Campbell primarily, but also in some of the games Skinner's played, they just need to get that puck to stop going in the net with regularity. Their power play, very good, 31.3%. Their penalty kill was awful last night. They only killed 1 out of 5 against Washington. 67.9% overall now. They're in pretty rough shape as a penalty killing team, but they've got some company in the West. The thing is, their company's all on this side of the board. They're 2-3 against the East after last night's result against the Caps. So problematic, yes. We'll see if that continues. Then you've got the Flames. The Flames got off to the hottest start in the league, and they've fallen off. They're now 5-4-2 after starting the season at 5-1. So for Calgary, their points percentage is .545. They have a -2 when it comes to goal differential. They're scoring 3.18 goals per game. They're allowing 3.36. Their special teams numbers aren't bad. 20% on the power play, 80% on the penalty kill. That's perfectly fine and even. Breaks them off at 100%. But against the East, they're 2-1-2. So if not for the 2 overtime losses against Eastern-based teams over the last few days here, we would have a team that would be 7-4. They'd be ahead of the Oilers. And points percentage-wise, they would be ahead of both Seattle and LA. And that's how easy things can change early in the season. But again, you don't want to be making up those points and having to fight to make up those points the rest of the season. Then we get to this side of the board, and this is where things get mediocre. Decidedly mediocre. So for Chicago, at 5-5-2, they're 500 on the season. -5 when it comes to goal differential. They're scoring 2.83 goals per game. They're allowing 3.17. Their power play's been good, 24.3%. Their penalty kill, less so, 71.4%. They're 2-1-1 against the East. So they have a decent record against the East. And when you look at it, you've got a team here in Calgary that's played 1 less game and has almost the same record as Chicago. If you're the Hawks right now, you're not mailing it in. And again, this is the thing. These teams that are supposed to be rebuilding, that are staying in the hunt, what does that do to the GMs, right? If you're Kyle Davidson right now, are you really looking at selling Taves and Kane? Or do you look and say, this team's performing well enough, maybe if we add somebody, right? And so as crazy as that sounds, we'll see if Chicago can stay in the hunt. Then you get into the first of the underperforming teams that are on this side of the board with the Minnesota Wild, who are 5-5-1. 500 records, so same as Chicago. They have a -5 as well, same as Chicago in terms of goal differential. 3.09 goals scored per game, 3.64 goals against per game. The power play has been very good, 26.3%. The penalty kill, less good, 73.5%. So for Minnesota, they had a really rough start. It felt like they were digging their way out. And now it's a matter of which Minnesota team's going to show up on which night. I don't put them in the same category of being unpredictable as the Kings, but they're close. So we'll see. And that loss against Seattle really feels at this point in time like that was kind of major, right? If they win that one, they're in a much better spot. Nashville has kind of brought themselves back into the conversation. They're 5-6-1 on the season, so their points percentage is .458. -6 is their goal differential. They're scoring 2.75 goals per game, but they're allowing 3.25 goals against per game. And after the slow start against Vancouver, they came back, they tie the game, they win it in overtime, or in shootout, I should say. 14.9% on the power play, so the woeful power play is back. But 82.6% on the penalty kill is not bad. And I say it's bad because I think it was 2 years ago, 2 seasons ago, Nashville had a pretty poor power play. I know it's a recent season where Nashville's had a really poor power play, so I apologize if I got the season wrong. But still, it's the same idea of they need to improve that power play. And then you get to Arizona. Arizona's not supposed to be in this spot, right? They're 4-6-1. So how far out of the playoffs are they? 3 points. So they're not as far out as one would think. Now, 409 is the points percentage. Their goal differential, negative 14, so not great. They're scoring 2.82 goals per game. They're allowing 4.09. Now, 2.82 goals per game isn't bad. It really, honestly, it's not bad. And considering the lineup they have, it's actually kind of impressive that they're able to score as much as they do. The question is being able to keep it out of the net. The interesting thing is their special teams are actually pretty good. 29% on the power play, 81% on the penalty kill. So that adds up to 110, which is considered to be elite. So not bad. 4-5 against the East, whereas Nashville's 0-3 against the East, so that drags them down. Minnesota's 3-2-1 against the East, so they're keeping around 500. Keep in mind, 2 of those wins are against Montreal, but still. And with Arizona having only played the West twice so far this season, it's kind of a fascinating story there that they have a very East-heavy start to the season. And if we're going to argue that the East is tougher than the West, maybe Arizona's going to be better than we think. Maybe Arizona's going to keep themselves in the hunt a little bit longer. They are also a team with some cap space, and it might be kind of exciting, if you can make it work. They have the 14-game road trip coming up, of course. If they can survive that 14-game road trip, who knows? The West right now does not look that strong, right? Well, you have I think eight good teams over here. I definitely think that some of these teams are vulnerable to falling out if somebody gets hot. And why not Arizona, right? Just to throw everything into complete chaos. Then you've got Vancouver. There's a down arrow next to Vancouver for a reason. They're 3-6-3 to start the season. 30-75 points percentage, a -8 in goal differential. 3.42 goals scored per game, and they're allowing 4 goals per game. It's been a problem. 30.2% on the power play. So their offensive numbers, their power play are good. The 3.42, right up in line with Seattle, in line with LA, not far off of what Vegas, Colorado are producing, better than the Jets, but they're allowing 4 goals against per game. And I think the defense needs to be looked at, and so does Demko's performance to this point. He hasn't looked very Demko-like. He looked better against Nashville, but he hasn't seemed to be Demko lately. So that 30.2% on the power play is good. The 60.5% on the penalty kill is awful. The penalty kill has been a major problem for Vancouver. And then you look at the record against the East, 1-5-1. So yeah, Vancouver's definitely one of the reasons that the West versus East looks as lopsided as it does. And then right beneath them on the standings, you have Anaheim, who also have not helped the West versus East battle. The Ducks are 4-8-1 overall. They're scoring 2.85 goals per game. They're allowing 4.62 goals per game. Their points percentage, 346. They're -22 in goal differential. So Anaheim's still in the midst of their rebuild. Their power play is terrible at 11.4%. Their penalty kill, also terrible at 63.3%. Better than Vancouver's, but faint praise. And so it is ridiculous that there's 4 teams on this board with percentages below 70 when it comes to penalty kill. And then there's one right here, too, that's 70.7 that's flirting with going below 70%. So for Anaheim, they're 1-6-1 against the East. So between Vancouver and Anaheim, they're 2-11-2 against the East. So maybe it's not as much the East beats the West as Vancouver and Anaheim can't beat Eastern-based teams. And yeah, that's going to be a problem because, again, that's 32 games in your schedule. And so you got to figure that out. You got to be able to beat those teams when you've got the interconference matchups. Then you got San Jose. They're 3-8-3 on the season in 14 games. 3-8-3 in 4 games. That's remarkable. 2.57 goals scored per game. They're allowing 3.29. Their points percentage, 321. -13 in goal differential. One thing that also stands out, comparatively speaking, with the West and the East, in the West, there are a lot more teams with more than a -10 in goal differential. And San Jose not being an exception to that. Their power play, 18.6%, so not great, but their penalty kill, is fantastic. The PK at 92.3%. They are 3-4-1 against the East. So they're better against the East than Anaheim or Vancouver thus far. Better than Nashville as well. I mean, if you throw in Nashville. But anyways, yeah, for San Jose, it's just it really is just a year that they're going through this rebuild that they still don't admit they're in, but they're in it. Then you have St. Louis, who surprisingly to everybody is at the bottom. 10 games, 3-7 record. I know, 2018, 2019, they were last in the league. Don't write them off, but it's not a plan. It's not like there's a strategy in St. Louis of, hey guys, let's be bad again so we can win the Stanley Cup in 2023. That's not a thing. 300's the point percentage for them thus far. They're allowing 16 more goals than they've scored to this point. 2.2 goals scored per game and 3.8 goals against. And there's blame to go around in St. Louis. I did a video on it. The losing streak, 7 games now. I thought they played better in Boston last night, although they still didn't get the result that they would have wanted. Their power play, not bad, 22.2%, but the penalty kill, another one below 70% at 69.6%. I don't think you can make the playoffs with a penalty kill below 70%. And I say that even though the Oilers are at 67.9, because I think the Oilers are they have to bring that up. But against the East, St. Louis is 1-3. So overall, by my count, teams in the West have won 37 games against teams in the East. They've lost 42 in regulation, and they've lost 8 in extra time, which is overtime and shootouts. So 37 wins in 87 games against the East. It's a good talking point. However, Nashville 0-3, Vancouver 1-5-1, Anaheim 1-6-1, St. Louis 1-3. So those 4 teams are really contributing to this idea that the West is way better than the East, or the East is way better than the West, I should say. And there are teams in the West doing their best to make up the difference. And most of them seem to be on this side of the board. So is that part of the picture that we're not seeing here? Is that because certain teams don't play well against the East, that they're sacrificing their playoff hopes in return? Because I would say that from Arizona down, these teams are really in tough to make the playoffs already. So as an example, you've got St. Louis with 6 points. You've got Calgary with 12. So if they win their next game, the game they have in hand, they'd be 4 points behind Calgary. But as I mentioned yesterday, you then have to make up those points on Calgary while you're passing all these other teams here. And with 3-point games being as prominent as they get to be later in the season, making up those points gets more and more difficult. We watched Vancouver do that last year. That's why this start's been so frustrating. Last year, Vancouver gets off to a horrible start. They fired Green and Benning. Things got better, but they didn't have enough time left. They had already sacrificed so much of a gap in the standings that they couldn't make up the difference and they couldn't get in the playoffs. And I have a concern the Canucks could follow that same playbook this year. By the time they get this turned around, it could just be too late. So for St. Louis, who again, I understand 2018, 2019, I don't see a master plan with this of being able to turn it around and win. With that too, St. Louis had to change coaches, and I don't think Berube's going anywhere necessarily. That being said, you do get hired to be fired as a coach. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always, including how many teams on this side of the board do you think drop out? Who do you think it's going to be? How many teams on this side of the board then jump in? And how many teams are already in a position where they should be looking at next year? Are St. Louis in that category as well? Should they be looking at maybe trading Ryan O'Reilly? He's in the final year of his contract. And if you're of the mind that St. Louis isn't going to pull themselves out of this and O'Reilly's not producing either, do you look at that? And I'm just saying look at it, not necessarily trade him, but do you look at it? Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.